Hello, welcome to IDD Talks. My name is Anastasia Lavrina, and today we have a special guest, Rodrigo Labardini, Diplomat-in-Residence, Professor in Practice, former Ambassador to Nicaragua and Azerbaijan. Hello and welcome to our program.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. It's been a pleasure to talk with you and your audience as well. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now you're teaching in other university. It's a real pleasure for us to have you in IDD Talks today. And I guess it will be a nice lesson, our discussion for your students as well. So let's speak about the cooperation between Mexico, Azerbaijan, and not only, because as far as I know, Mexico is the third largest country in Latin America, and the distance between two countries, the Mexico and Azerbaijan, it's 12,000 kilometers. But it has never been a problem. Two countries had a chance to cooperate, and during your term of to be diplomat in our country, you also contributed much to the development of bilateral cooperation. So my first question, what is the significance of Azerbaijan for the countries in Latin America on the example of Mexico?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the question. Rather interesting because we live basically on two different hemispheres. That's, you properly point out, it's more than 12,000 kilometers between Mexico and Baku. It's a humongous amount of distance. Even for Mexicans to understand, it's complicated. Let me put the distance-wise what it really means. 12,000 kilometers is going from Baku to Seoul and back. That's 6,000 plus 6,000. From Mexican side, it's from Mexico to Baku, it's 12,625 kilometers, if I'm not mistaken, which is basically the distance shorter by 200 kilometers than Beijing. Beijing is 200 kilometers, 12,400. And New Zealand is 12,700. It's basically the same thing. What happens is we live literally in two different hemispheres, and it's just different going back and forth.
Just one question. How many hours does it take to come from Mexico to Azerbaijan?
By plane, it's minimum 18 hours on the plane.
Okay.
But it's not a direct flight. It must always be at least one stop either in the US or Europe or two, sometimes three.
So you spend almost a day to come to Azerbaijan?
Basically, yes.
Even
minimum
more sometimes.
In my case, I've taken up to almost 2 days.
I see.
So, but still, that is one of the first challenges to do between relations between both countries, and that is the distance. The second challenge is, of course, the language. Because in Mexico, we speak Spanish, hablamos español, and a little English sometimes. And here it says, Azerbaijan del var, чуть-чуть по-русски тоже. And we don't understand that. So what happens here? But the one thing that we found out is that you find a partner. You find that we're all human. And you find that we can talk between ourselves. One example is trade. Let me say that I want to sell to you this, and I don't speak Russian or Azerbaijani. So you start talking. And so that's the way to go. We find natural areas to cooperate between both countries, which of course is energy, oil, and gas, with both hydrocarbon producers. But there's also trade, security, the world multilateral affairs, social issues as well. So they're very much in line. And one thing we found, you find out when you come to this country, is that we're all humans. And by that I say, it's very evident when I say that we're all humans. But it's difficult to assimilate that. Why? Because you have different customs than we do. We have different social norms and things. But when you get here, you learn that you spend the life same as we do. We all have to go to work. We'll have to go to school. We all have to go and buy the groceries at the supermarket. We all must go. We have children. They grow. The different affairs of life are very similar. And it takes a lot of while to really understand that. It's evident, but to assimilate that.
So it's mostly about human relations and diplomats, how you can present your country to be interested for Azerbaijan and how our diplomats can present Azerbaijan to be interested for your people. Then after it comes to entrepreneurs and businessmen who can start discussion, exchange of information and the products which come to the market.
Very much. It's human nature, essentially. That's the way you need to go around. And internationally, both Azerbaijan and Mexico have followed very similar positions on international law, based on international law, which always is very good for the Azerbaijani and the Mexican position as well. In multilateral fora, we meet in eyes constantly. and we assist each other. The activities of Mexico and Azerbaijan in UNESCO, for example, are very well known, in which Mexico has received support of from the Azerbaijani government as well. That goes well when Mexico puts out a candidate for a multilateral affairs organization, for a committee, a human rights committee, whatever. You will get the support from Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan also gets support. So it's exchange of votes. In multilateral affairs, it's a wide, well-known area of
Could you provide
expertise.
any example when, for example, Mexico supported Azerbaijan or Azerbaijan supported Mexico within the United Nations or non-aligned movement? We know that two countries have very productive cooperation on the platform of these two very important international platforms.
In multilateral affairs, it's a prerequisite. You need to know everybody. You need to understand, and you need to know how to communicate things. In the UN, it's been evident. Mexico has the fortune of being a member of the Security Council several times now, and in which occasions you get to complicated, tough issues, sometimes dealing on territorial integrity, and that's where we've shown our greatest and continuous support. We get to issues like COVID, and talking, what you mentioned right now, the non-aligned movement, NAM. And that's an important issue dealing with. NAM is a very important organization, group in the world, some 126 countries, really.
The second largest after the United Nations General Assembly.
Indeed. But it's also its participation of the world is very important. You have all of Africa is there except for South Sudan, which is basically 50 countries. Around 70% of Asia is present. Around 75% of Latin America is present as well. So it's a very encompassing group. In the Mexican case, Mexico is an observer at NAM, but that does not mean that we cannot cooperate. And when you see that Azerbaijan was elected to chair NAM between 2019 and extended until November 23 of this year, you see the actions and what Azerbaijan has been doing in that sense. One in which we rate very much, for example, is of COVID. And the actions that Azerbaijan took in favor of COVID were very clear. Something we shared. Mexico in 2020, we demanded, we criticized the fact that there was no access to vaccines. There was an unequal access. And later on, Azerbaijan, on behalf of NAM, presented a resolution at the United Nations General Assembly indicating that we needed just, affordable, timely, and universal access to vaccines. So the positions are very similar in that sense. We all see in NAM what Azerbaijan has been trying to do. And we saw that in the recent March, the second March meeting here in Baku.
Here in Baku, right.
In which, again, it was evident, it was dealing with the post-pandemic recovery, in which the Azerbaijani government clearly put out a call for action in Africa and a call for action for SIDS, small island developing states. And that's very important because we all know that COVID affects everybody. However, the effects are more strongly, more severely felt by poor populations and by vulnerable groups. So the calls put out by Azerbaijan came out very strong, very good. And it shows a way to try to deal with the future. And it's something that is very much needed to do because it is clear that COVID affected the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030.
Rodrigo, you mentioned very important thing. You said about inequality, which appeared during the COVID time. We also should remember about the initiative proposed by President Ilham Aliyev as a chairperson in the non-aligned movement about a special session which was held on the platform of the United Nations.
Oh yes, for the United Nations high-level panel.
Exactly. And just recently, as you mentioned about the summit of non-aligned movement held in Baku, President Ilham Aliyev made another very important statement. The United Nations Security Council needs reforms.
Yes.
And you said about Mexico, which was a member, the most probably non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. Azerbaijan also had this experience in 2011. Do you think that the countries, especially from Africa, which is majority in the non-aligned movement, should have a voice in the United Nations Security Council? And how maybe two countries, Azerbaijan and Mexico, may cooperate to make sure that those countries, which is not visible enough in the United Nations, to become visible and to have more loud voice?
Yes, I, as a professor of AD at the time here, I noticed the proposal put out forward by President Aliyev for the chair of NAM to be part, and also for a permanent representative of African country, because it is the place where they will require the most attention in the future. Mexico has been part of the movement to try to change the Security Council. The Security Council worked during the Cold War, it worked well, but it needs changes. It needs to adapt to reality. And you see that it needs changes because now you see other groups coming up. You see the G7, the G20, and those groups, they're showing that the Security Council is not really working. There's something amiss. And that's where ideas, countries need to gather, Mexico, Azerbaijan, and like-minded group as well, to try to change and find a way to act, changes into the way Security Council acts. It is not just a small club. It is a group that has to oversee security issues, definitely, but has to widen. It has been widening the concept of how security really affects. It's not only military. Economic issues are a very important part of it. Health, development. If you don't attend them, you will affect the stability of any country, of any region. So it shows that even that type of activity of maybe preventive health, it's very much needed. The world saw with the pandemic a very, very acute issue with health, with COVID. But it showed that there's a ripple effect throughout the world. Something happens in one country, it will happen, it will push to somebody, because today everybody's globalized. Change needs to happen, but it has to be in a very way that includes, it must have social inclusion. It needs to have more a sense of empathy. We need to care for people that live in Africa, that live in Asia, that live in Polynesia, that live in Baku, that live in Mexico, because we're all the same humanity. And right now we're facing a very important, very challenging difficulty against us.
Make sure no one left behind.
Not only that, make sure not only left to tend them. And that is change. Environment is changing very much. And what we do today, minute as we might seem by not dropping something on, but not littering the street, it shows the will to do something.
When we spoke about the bilateral relations between Azerbaijan and Mexico, you touched another very important issue, energy. Two countries are developing its energy policy, and today Azerbaijan concentrates not only on oil and gas, but also on the development of green energy. And we know many countries, especially in the European Union, who are keen to support our government because they themselves are trying to work on a green energy development, electricity, and etc. So I would like you, as an experienced person who lives in Azerbaijan for many years already, tell us, how do you see the energy policy development of Azerbaijan, and why this is important not only for our region and even not only for the European Union, but can contribute to the global policy of the countries?
Thank you very much for the question. It goes to several points. I'm trying to do research here as well. And one, energy. I'm actually writing the beginning of a book about talking about foreign policy, in which I say foreign policy is just a way to get energy. Yes, energy like oil, like gas, like electricity, but energy also comes from trade, of linking. You need energy to sustain your life. Now, in the case of the energy policy in Azerbaijan, you see an evolving path, a refinement of the policy in allowing things to get stabilized. What I mean is, it was very well known that Azerbaijan, this area, has a lot of oil. I mean, we must remember the lamps that Alexander the Great used this one, and that's very much forgotten. It's forgotten that at the turn of the century, the 19th and 20th centuries, half of the world's production came from this area as well. During the Second World War, 80% of the Soviet oil was Baku, and so it shows the relevance of this, and it also shows something that very few people remember, that the first of anything in oil tends to be here in Azerbaijan. The first oil well, the first ship, the first underground, the first everything, because it's a long tradition. Now, the important thing about Azerbaijan is that it has evolved as well. It started with oil, and you see the evolution of pipelines. Pipelines going first into Russia, then going into the Black Sea, and going to Jehan and the Mediterranean, evolving, but at the same time paving and setting the way for gas. Gas is a very different commodity. In oil, you put it in the market. As long as you put it, you're able to carry the oil, the liquid, viscose but liquid still. You put it in the market, you can get it there. Once you got to the Mediterranean, it's in the world market, definitely. But gas, due to its volatility, you can only start producing really when you have a buyer. Because when you start getting it out, you need to send it and get it to the market. That requires a lot of effort, a lot of leadership, really, a lot of vision, because you need very long-term contracts in that sense. Because you put a lot of investment, you need the buyer itself, you need the collaboration of everybody in between. Best example, for example, is Southern Gas Corridor, which came up when Nabucco died. And it showed something that I realized about Azerbaijan. It's the practicality and the accepting of reality and making political choices and very practical decisions. Nabucco at that time was a very long, extremely long pipeline, very ambitious, coming from Iraq, from Iran, from Azerbaijan, going all the way to Austria. That was a design. And Nabucco West, and you're going all to those pipelines. But when Nabucco died, Azerbaijan with Turkey came up and said, well, let's just build from us to Greece, maybe extend it to Italy. And that's it. Let's not go so far, neither from the source, nor to the market. That's a practical decision.
And still there were some countries who didn't trust to the reality of this project.
What's even more surprising is that if we start seeing today the map of the gas pipelines, yes, you have SGC from the Caspian to Italy. But then once all the countries saw that HEC was coming, it's a reality, then you get other pipelines. I call them hop-on pipelines because, hey, guess what? HEC is here. Let's build an IGB, the interconnector Greece-Bulgaria. Now Macedonia, now Croatia, the IAP, you go on. So it will, at the end, it will be basically the same pipeline as Nabucco, but it was set just little by little, step by step. And energy now, going into green energy, you see electricity and solar and wind coming, hydropower. It's been developed very much. I mean, it's estimated the potential that Azerbaijan has for this is around 27 gigabytes onshore and 157 on the sea, just on the Caspian sector of Azerbaijan, which means there's a lot of wind. I mean, Baku is the city of the winds. So you can actually harness that power and convert it into electricity and send it over there. So again, so you see the oil, you see the gas, you see electricity, and coming from different sources as well. So it's an excellent way just on the energy. But it also follows what I see as what I call is the hinge. We all know that Europe and Asia, they're all in the same land mass. But there's a door, the Caspian Sea, the division, the Urals, Caspian, the Mediterranean, the Caucasus. But a door needs a hinge in order to open. And the hinge is, but for me, and that's part of a thesis that I'm actually writing in some papers about it, is that the hinge are the large regional infrastructure projects that have been built. That is, very few people today will know, or in Europe will know, that when they open the gas in the stove, the gas comes from Azerbaijan. They just know it's gas. But that's a real connectivity. Secondly, oil, gas, electricity will come again. And therefore, combined with logistics and trade, I say that the Caspian is the hinge of this door between both continents. But if you say the Caspian, by necessity, you have to say / Azerbaijan, because it is the only other country on the left shore, in addition to Russia and Iran. And now with the globalization, it's becoming evident that both sides, both hemispheres, need to get together and are getting together. And they're doing that through the Caspian, through Azerbaijan, and going on to Georgia. So geographically, you find basically two choke points, I call them. One is the Caspian and one is the Black Sea. If you see that, it will be Russia, the Caspian, Iran, and then you get to a similar situation with Russia, the Black Sea, and Turkey. And guess who built the HEC? Azerbaijan, Turkey, with Georgia as well, connected. And you see all these interactions. So these seems to be maybe the two hinges and the positions what it is. So for me, it's the best way to exemplify that Geopolitics, yes, is defined by the space you have, the opportunities, but it's also defined by what you want to do. Now, it's based on the leadership, on how you set the way for the future, and that is basically coming about right now, and we'll keep on going in this trend as well.
So Azerbaijan, let's say, had a chance to change, to contribute to the change of the energy map of Europe, and not only, as you rightly mentioned, but apart from energy, transport connectivity.
Yes,
Due to the
imagine.
new geopolitical reality, we see that maybe previously the country, especially in Europe, who relied on Azerbaijan in any kind of transport project, today they can see new potential for the development and partnership. Even the United States of America, which is also located far away from Azerbaijan, consider Azerbaijan as a very reliable and strong partner in dealing with energy issues on the global market and in the transport connectivity. Middle Corridor and the opportunity for operation of Zangezur corridor, which will pass on the territory of Armenia and then connect some Asian countries through Azerbaijan with Turkey and further to Europe. Let's talk also about this transport connectivity in the region. What is your vision of the current situation and the future prospects? Maybe here also Azerbaijan can start from the small project now, and then the countries from Europe will rely on Azerbaijan as the only constructive partner in their big global.
It's a follow-up to the same idea, really. Trade and logistics require a lot of coordination. Let's put it, one example is on the Caspian. If on one side you build facilities to move 10 units, 10 tons, and on the other side you build facilities to move 25 tons, well, there's not much going except for the 10, correct? You can have 25, but if it's only 10 on the other side. That also follows with legislation, with customs decisions, with paperwork. There's a humongous amount of administrative work and coordination and harmonization to deal with this. Because if you want to send something from China to Europe, you also need to send from Europe to China, because you're not going to send the containers empty. You try to put something in at least.
For sure.
But that requires a lot of coordination. It even starts just from a very simple practical fact. You need to have the same gauge in the railroads, for example. Because gauges in the railroads, some may be 40, 50, different width. When you get to that, you need to change, and that provokes delays into it. The same happens if you need a different passport, different languages, different customs. As long as you have one single paper that everybody abides that, it will make it easier. It will be hard. It is hard to do the harmonization. So it's just another way of, as I say, it's a modification of the energy. But if you get your product from one place to the other, you will get input they will put into your industry. So you're actually getting some type of modified energy into it. And then you can sell maybe the product or vice versa. I know of cases in which one country, for Mexico in Latin America, produces copper. We send it to Nicaragua. They make it into cables. Those cables are sent back to Mexico and put into cars that we sell to the US. So the same thing would happen here. You bring something to China, you take it to Europe, you bring it back and forth, and you need connectivity. The connectivity requires a lot of effort, because in the case of railroads, for example, they're mostly developed for domestic development. That is, when you build a railroad, you want to connect Baku with Ganja, or you want to connect with Gabala, because main areas. It's not really thinking about what's on the other side of the border. But once you find that, and Azerbaijan has a very international vocation, then you start working to not only to do it local market, but also viewing and having a view to the international arena as well. And in this part, you have to recognize that Azerbaijan has been doing very well in this sense, because being a landlocked state, it requires the ability, the cooperation of other states in order to get outside. And it's developing very well in that sense. So,
but again, for the development and the future prosperity of the projects which we today discussed, the stability and security is one of the key elements. Definitely, it doesn't matter whether it's in the South Caucasus, in the Latin America, in Europe, or somewhere else. And the situation in the South Caucasus, post-conflict development, 2 and more years already passed since the end of the Second Karabakh War. All of this period of time, you were in Azerbaijan. Tell us about your vision of the post-conflict development, whether we can think and about the future peace development in the region, which will contribute much to the global project initiated by Azerbaijan and supported by the European countries.
Linking and association will be fundamental to do this and understand. Both sides need, that's a prerequisite. Both sides need to understand the need for the future. They cannot live isolated. They're neighbors.
Azerbaijan is not isolated. It's more about Armenia, which is isolated.
I'm not meaning they're isolated from the world, but between themselves. They need to talk with each other and go to understand that and move forward on that. It's very much part that Armenia, I think, will be the greatest benefit, will benefit a lot from opening and from moving forward, because the isolation in which it's currently living will come to an end, and it will assist itself. The linking between the regions is paramount. It's not only logistics and trade, but it's just security, as you mentioned at the beginning. The stability of the region is of paramount importance. This is the Caucasus. It's a very important part of the world throughout history. It's been sought after by empires. It's been sought after by regions, by a lot of actors. So there's a lot of interest. So there needs to be stability in the region, which will allow everybody to benefit. And that's the main point. It's not to go by individual interests, but by the regional interests at the same time. And they will benefit both ways, the experience in both things. Other issues that will affect here, will become very much involved, is a very crucial aspect of life, which is water. The Caspian Sea, the rivers, and that affects the whole region as well. Whatever, something happens upstream will affect downstream. There's a lot of issues here, there, and that requires a lot of dialogue and understanding. Seeing water, seeing the region as one entity, that it's not isolated. It is intertwined, and it's very much part right now of the world geopolitical arena. And you can see this by the fact that there are approximately some 80 resident embassies here in Baku. Cities the size of Mexico City or Chile will have around the same number of embassies, which means that the world is paying attention just about the same level. And that's important to stress, because you may think that the size of the country may not be as large as others, but it shows that its relevance in energy, in trade, in stability, in so many issues is very important, and the world is paying attention. That's why countries are coming to Baku and opening resident ambassadors, resident embassies. I think that's the best clear indication. I see Azerbaijan going forward very well with the chairmanship of NAM, going into UN, going into UNESCO. The presence of Azerbaijan in UNESCO is impressive. It's a must know. You need to know Azerbaijan if you want on UNESCO. There's so many things here. And of course, oil, gas, energy. Energy is the future. Water is now developing as much. And there's too many issues right here in the region. And it's difficult, and I'd say this, at least from the Latin American view, it's difficult for us to understand what really happens, because you live on the other side of the hemisphere. And we get sometimes back away because you think that the language is a barrier, the distance is another barrier. But once you get to see what Azerbaijan shows, the buildings, the society, the development, the efforts, the leadership to really push forward benefits for the country, for the region, then you start understanding that there's a lot of possibilities to develop as long as you want to. And that goes for the region, for the other side of the world. As long as you want to, there's a will to do things. You can achieve those things as well.
Of course. Rodrigo, thank you. Thank you so much for joining IDD Talks. It was a real pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much again for the opportunity, and thanks again for everybody.
Thanks.